Welcome, everyone, to our event this evening, a discussion of Beyonce's Black is King. This is sponsored by the Department of African and African American Studies at the University of Kansas, the Lincoln Hughes Center at the University of Kansas, and the Kansas African Studies Center. We're excited for this discussion. My name is Sean Alexander from the Department of African and African American Studies. And today we have an incredible panel, in my opinion. First off, what we're going to do is we're going to have each panelist talk for about 5 to 8 minutes each, giving a position, a discussion of Beyonce and Beyonce's Black is King performance. Then they will have a conversation amongst themselves for a few minutes beyond that, asking each other questions that is prompted by the discussion that we've had. And then about 7:50, 8 o'clock, the last 30 to 40 minutes, we will open this up to question and answers from the audience, which we are excited to get. And you can place those questions in the Q&A function, and we will monitor those questions. You can put the questions in at any moment, but we'll get to those in the last 40 to 30 minutes. So again, my name is Sean Alexander from the African and African American Studies Department here at the University of Kansas. And today we have a wonderful panel. Stephanie Shonekan, who is an Associate Dean of Music and Professor of Black Studies and Music at the University of Missouri. Ayesha Hardison, who is a Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies and English here at the University of Kansas. James Yékú, Professor of African and African American Studies. Tony Bolden, Professor of African American Studies, and Nicole Hodges Persley, a Professor of African and African American Studies and American Studies here at the University of Kansas. And that is the order we're going to go in, that we're going to have this kickoff today. So Professor Shonekan, if you want to start us off.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sean, for inviting me to this panel. Even though, as we've already quipped, I am from down the road at the University of Missouri. I am thrilled to be talking about this album. It's been on my mind for a while. So Black is King is a gift, pun intended. We all know what a gift is. It is packaged and given to a loved one. We may not all love a gift in the same way, but we are generally pleasantly surprised and excited to receive it. There may be aspects of the gift that are questionable or problematic. If it's a sweater, for example, it may be too big, too tight, too colorful, but it's still a gift. With that in mind, my comments will reflect the complex ways we receive gifts. I speak as someone who straddles the Black world. My father is Nigerian, my mother is Trinidadian, and I spent much of my upbringing in Nigeria. My entire career, though, has been spent studying African American history, music, and culture. As Beyonce says on Black is King, quote, "A journey is a gift, something to offer at the door to the rooms of your heart, of your mind, and that is how we journey far and can still always find something like home," end of quote. So home for me is where my heart is. It is my family, it is any Black space, it is the Black diaspora, it is specific and it is general. Black is King it certainly reminds me of home in all its manifestations. Last night, what happened in Nigeria hit me very hard because that is still and will always be and always will be home for me. I'll come back to that, and I hope you all have been following news of Nigeria, but it really is on my mind as I think about this album. I'll come back to it at the end of my comments, and I'll only take a few minutes here. So there are many things I love about this project. First, it is extravagant. It is an extravagant showcase of Black womanhood and Black beauty. My daughter, Ojurere, who is a junior, a senior, she's a senior now. This COVID thing just has our timeline just whacked. But she's a senior who in college, she may be the president of the Beyoncé, and we've already said, right, Nicole, that the Beyoncé is coming for us if we say anything bad. But Ojurere who is a big fan of Beyonce. She made us watch the film together. She said, quote, "Mom, it's a gift because it was made for us. They might as well have put our names on it. It's a culmination of all things Black, Africans and African Americans coming together." And for someone who was born in this country, of parents who are from Nigeria, she really sits there in the middle of that space. So for me, as a gift, Black is King is packaged in the most stunning, indulgent, extravagant, opulent wrapping paper. I love that about it. I remember when my kids were growing up, Lion King and Madagascar were the only mainstream cinematic offerings on Africa, and there were no people in those films. When we got to The Princess Frog, we discovered that Tiana would be a frog for most of the film. How often do Black girls see themselves on the screen so beautifully? They deserve this and more. So Black is King is beautiful just for that. Another Nigerian American I know, a young woman called Janet, told me, quote, "I remember after watching Black is King, I was pretty emotional. Growing up in the States, I've never seen a mainstream project like this celebrating Black people, specifically dark-skinned girls. I was very surprised to see such backlash for the project," and there was, and we can talk about that later. From people who stated that demons were being celebrated to why was Beyonce appropriating African culture, Janet goes on, "I saw this project as art and entertainment. I loved how she incorporated African artists in this project, just like the impact of Black Panther. I think projects like these are slowly changing the perception of Africa for Western culture. I think Black youth today are very blessed to have representations like this and know that they are beautiful and strong," end of quote. So the other day I was on a Zoom call with a white colleague who was fascinated by my ring light. I have to pay attention to how I look on all these Zoom calls. I have to do a little extra work to illuminate my dark brown skin. I turned the ring light off at a moment in our meeting, and he was shocked, he was fascinated. Throughout Black is King, all the different shades of Black beauty are illuminated beautifully. So it's like the big ring light is on at all times. And we so rarely get to see that. I know that a lot of work went into that. In Brown Skin Girl, obviously, we see this with Lupita, Naomi Campbell, Kelly Rowland, Blue Ivy, and all the beautiful women across the different countries where this was shot. Another thing I love about Black is King is Black love and the exhibition of Black love. I love it. I love seeing it. I love being in it. And I love experiencing it. We don't see it enough. On the track Mood, we see, of course, Jay-Z is in the picture, and it's a reminder of where we left off with Lemonade. And so Black love is something that I always love, and we saw lots in the film, lots of frames and screens of Black love, people who are in love, who are together. Again, that's something we see so rarely. Another thing I love about it is that white supremacy is put in its place. I love that the only place we see white men is as butlers and servers. And I think that that's wonderful. I think that's in the song Nile. I think my favorite thing about Black is King is that it reminds me of home. It reminds me of Nigeria. It reminds me of Lagos. And there's the particular song is Keys to the Kingdom, which is actually my favorite song on the album. But it's shot in Nigeria. One of the first frames we see is a shot of the National Theatre, which is where the Festac celebration of 1976 1997 took place, which was a wonderful diasporic celebration of Black music and Black art. I had never seen anything like it when that happened. We also see in Keys to the Kingdom two young women who are wearing the NYSC uniform. That is the National Youth Service Corporation, I think, uniform, which is something that all of us did when we were going through after we finished undergrad. It was nice to see those sorts of nods to our experiences in Nigeria. That just made me feel so good. What I love about this film is that it shows the gorgeous landscape of Africa, from the cities to rural areas to the desert. It's just gorgeous. But I think as an ethnomusicologist, I really appreciate the beautiful soundscape of Black world music. And it reminds us of the common approaches to music making, whether it's Afrobeats, high life, and Afrobeat without the S, that is exhibited by Yemi Alade, Tiwa Savage, Wizkid, Burna Boy, and several others. We see Wasula, which is exhibited by Umu Sangare of Mali. We hear gospel and we see it in spirit. And of course, hip hop is all over the place with Kendrick, Tierra Whack, Jay-Z, Childish Gambino, and Pharrell. What I don't particularly love about this film is that I don't like the reminders of the colonial and post-colonial era. And we see this in Mood, where we see the Rolls Royce, the mansions. It just reminds me of that era right after independence. We see this also in Keys to the Kingdom, where we see the lawyers and the judges in the ridiculous wigs that they're wearing that are a reflection of the colonial past. I don't like that because I think we can argue that we are at the moment that we are at in Nigeria because of that complex past. Thinking about Black is King against the backdrop of the Lekki massacres, the massacre in Nigeria last night, reminds us that while we celebrate the resilience, beauty, and creativity of a diverse people, we must also pay close attention to the enduring hegemonic ramifications of colonialism and military dictatorships that are built on white supremacist structures. I know there are criticisms of Beyonce for not speaking up quickly enough about the End SARS movement, which is going on right now. And there are criticisms about appropriating African music. And we should talk about this. I spent years writing about how Africans were appropriating African-American music and vice versa. I've written articles on it. My most recent article on the topic steps back and imagines the Black world as a space where we share and borrow from each other. So appropriation between us is different from appropriation between Black people and white people. The most powerful message from the Black is King project is to remind us that the Black world can be a cohesive, generative space for our diverse groups. Indeed, the young Nigerian activists who moved so powerfully in Nigeria were inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that Black is King reminds us that this is possible. Thank you. And I'll hand it over to Ayesha.
Thank you. I come to this film as someone who was really excited when The Lion King came out in the movie theater. So I was very much a fan of the movie and was very curious coming to the film to see how Black is King would connect to The Lion King, as well as the adaptation that was recently released in theaters. So there are ways, and very obvious ways, in which Black is King is drawing on The Lion King. We have the iconic voice of James Earl Jones. We have the face painting of a young Simba. We have Nala voicing danger and the threat of Scar in Black is King, as well as the reference to Hakuna Matata and the ways in which Rafiki questions identity and expresses or conveys the importance of recognition. But there is an obvious revision that Black is King makes to The Lion King, and it's the idea of Blackness as king, that Black is King references the beauty, the power, the glory, and the collectivity of Blackness. And in fact, the title seems to signify or makes Blackness a personification of king and what that all means in terms of regalness and authority and power. Yet Beyonce's subtext in the film is more the story of a queen. And so my comments and observations about the film will really highlight and focus on that. Beyonce voices her feminist extension of The Lion King, or she starts or initiates this feminist extension of The Lion King in the remake. So there's more of a development of Nala's character in the remake than in the original. And this is kind of expressed in the moment in which Nala's character leads the pride in battle. And she kind of articulates almost this Beyonce-esque call to formation. But Beyonce further expands her womanist intervention, both visually and orally in Black is King. Alice Walker, who coins the term feminist, writes that a woman who loves other women sexually and or non-sexually is a womanist. A womanist appreciates and prefers women's culture, women's emotional flexibility, and women's strength. And I see Beyonce manifesting womanism in the way that she widens the story of The Lion King in Black is King to think about not only lost fathers, but to recover mothers. So alongside images of ancestral kings preserved in the stars, which is part of the narrative of The Lion King, and we see it in Black is King, we see Beyonce and her female dancers wearing glittery bodysuits in the desert, dancing to a refrain of "Find Your Way Back." So we see this transition from the father to women and the ancestral kings and the stars to these female dancers and their glittering bodysuits. And these suits and this fashion seem to embody a present as well as a very stylized, and as Stephanie said, an extravagant future. We also see portraits of Beyonce as a Black Madonna, portraits of her with her children, beautified in various ways, as well as sees her daughter in various moments in the film, as well as her mother, as well as Kelly Rowland, a fellow member of Destiny's Child, which she has framed or categorized or identified as a sister. So we see these representations of various female family members. I also thought about the moment in which we see Beyonce in this domestic space that's coded as Move Forever. And in this moment, she is literally a queen on a real life chessboard. So we see her represented as a queen, as well as the interesting ways in domesticity is framed as she and Jay-Z eating in front of a TV, but also drinking champagne. So there's a luxuriousness about that moment. But we also see a kind of affirmation of Black women and girls. We see Black women and girls sharing hand clap games. We see them hair braiding. And as Stephanie mentioned, we see Black female beauty affirmed in the song Brown Skin Girl, where debutantes attend a cotillion and they look like princesses. And we also see representations of not only the celebrities, but also these female genealogies or these family portraits that seem to center Black women. So one moment that stood out to me in particular about the film is the moment in the original narrative where the confrontation, that Simba returns, and the confrontation that happens between Scar and the Pride. And this song is signaled by My Power. But this song in particular is not about the character Simba or how he's represented in Black is King, but about women. So there are female vocalists on that song. There's a representation of an older woman flexing, showing her power. there is a pregnant dancer in that moment performing, and Beyonce's oldest daughter is also featured in that. And so you see this kind of artistic performative collaboration between Black women. And the refrain of that song is, "They'll never take my power, my power, my power." And some of the lyrics state that I was always in the lead where you want to be, who they want to be, refer to me as a goddess. I'm tired of being modest. So this power is definitely related to the feminine or femininity or woman. Where Beyonce, or when she returns to the idea or the image of king, she actually redefines it. And I also see this as part of her trying to make a womanist intervention in The Lion King in her film, Black is King. So a king becomes someone who is community-centered and someone who is not selfless, someone who's taking on the responsibilities of the community. And when the film comes full circle, again, following a kind of loosely following the narrative of the Lion King, when Simba returns, the film Black is King really returns to Beyonce. So she's the lost or the forgotten mother from the beginning of the film, that she's the mother who saves a child. And she's decidedly positioned at the end of the film where we see this new crowning or ritualization or the recognition of the new king. So Beyonce's construction of Queen, I would argue, definitely is about mother. And we see representations of her motherhood throughout. And I think it encompasses what Alice Walker conceptualizes in her term womanism, that a womanist is committed to the survival and wholeness of an entire people, male and female. And this is really exemplified by the end of the film, where she reveals that motherhood is just not focused on girls, but also about boys. So we see this dedication of the film to her son, Sir Carter, at the end. And we get this, although we've seen Beyonce's family and her children or her daughters represented in the film, we get this home footage at the end of the film. So this kind of personal, intimate moment between Beyonce and her son at the end. The dedication to her son and the quote, "And to all our sons and daughters, the sun and the moon bow for you. You are the kings of the kingdom." So I find it really interesting the ways in which femininity or a feminist aesthetic or a womanist ideology is very much tied to queendom and motherhood in this film. That's then emphasized in the closing credits of the film with the song that plays and this idea of motherland. And so we might even talk about how mother is related to mother in a literal sense is related to an imagined motherland that drips on me. But also in that song, she affirms this kind of rewriting of a more male-centered narrative by saying in the lyrics, "I can't forget my history is her story." And so we can think about her story as centering Black women, but also the ways in which Beyonce interjects a kind of personal, intimate self throughout the film as well.
Thanks, Ayesha. And I just want to pick it up on that note and just circle back a little to what Stephanie was saying earlier about the NSAS protest online and on the streets of different cities in Nigeria. It's been a couple of traumatizing days for me and many other people just seeing all of those images. So I was really interested in seeing Beyonce articulate some kind of solidarity, which she eventually did. Anyway, I'll just go straight to my brief reflections and couch them in terms of provocations. So there are 3 points I wish to make, and all of these are organized around the words of the title of the album is Black is King. And the reason I do this is because I believe Black is King seems to be, for me, a meta test that kind of gesture back at its own systems of meanings. In other words, I find it test to be very self-reflexive in a conscious and political manner, whose representations glamorize the continent almost. But to my first point, and that's the meaning articulated by the word black itself. What does blackness cohere around in a text? And my question would be, whose black is king? So that's the first question I'm thinking about. Would this include is this limited to the blacks of the diaspora alone, or would we think of blackness in terms of African immigrants to the US or Africans in Africa? I ask this because I have seen several Black studies scholars in recent weeks since I arrived in the US last year who would prefer to erase African subjectivities from, say, a course on Black sexualities. And you just wonder how the necessary interface between Africa and its diaspora seems to be egregiously absent. I imagine that to such scholars, Beyoncé might be saying, like we find in The Lion King, a moment of intertextuality, and many of them in the text. Beyoncé will say, we're all connected in this great circle of life. And this is precisely one of the high points for me, just coming to grip with Black is King. My sense is that Blackness is a meeting point that needs to unite us rather than divide us. And I think this is what Beyoncé does, especially as she brings different performers and collaborators from different parts of Africa, celebrating and foregrounding African spiritualities and cultures and languages. My sense of all of this is that Beyoncé shows that Blackness exists in some kind of multiplicity. In other words, the idea that different shades of Blackness exist in many different ways seems to be central to the articulations of the text. There's no fixed or universal experience of Blackness anywhere. So the pastiche of elements from the various images speak to that idea. And I think it is one that speaks to this present moment in a lot of ways. And that leads me to my second point on the B verb is, which I think speaks to the nature of Black existence. On the one hand, I think it taps into the current wave of decolonization around the world, and that is perfectly fine, especially when you think about the resurgence of Black supremacist ideas. But I wonder if the materialist metaphor is implicated in the fact of being Black outside the circles of American popular culture, and its neoliberalism indeed affirms a thesis of kinship. That's one of the questions I have. I wonder, speaking of the present temporalities, do the vulnerable communities hit most by COVID in the US think of themselves in terms of reality? And if you think of suffering masses around Africa, around the Black world, will they think of themselves in terms of being kings? These are some of the questions I think Black is King compels us to ask, which takes me to my last point on the significations of kingship. And Ayesha was speaking to this. My sense of this is to think about the patriarchal monarchy that is immediately implicated in the idea of kinship. I would suggest that there is a romanticization of pre-colonial African kingdoms that fits into patterns of glamorization and thirst that seem to return to the motherland. Now, I realize that the reference king itself symbolizes leadership. Black must be synonymous with glory, like Beyoncé says. But the problem of patriarchal monarchy comes back when you think again about its presence in a text like Black Panther, which seems to be in the same genre. If you remember that women who seem to be at the epistemological and military core of Black Panther may never become its king, then you begin to get a sense of the feminist politics of the text. And I say this despite the fact that Black Panther is believed to be a feminist text. The point for me is to think about how Black is King present a lot of ambivalences, especially in terms of the politics it articulates. Now, we can read the album generally as circulating repeated tropes that homogenize or essentialize thousands of African cultures in service of Black capitalism. But on the other hand, I think the pastiche of voices and performative bodies may also signal a celebration of Blackness experienced differently by Blacks around the world. So the question of appropriation, for instance, might be relevant because, like Stephanie says, you cannot appropriate what what you're connected to spiritually and genetically, if you like. You cannot appropriate your roots, I would say. So I like to basically offer thoughts that would perhaps signal some level of ambivalence both on my part, because I think the text itself generates a lot of ambivalence in terms of specifically what it means to be Black, whose Black is being celebrated, and what view. I'll leave it at that, and I think Ayesha is next. Probably Nicole, sorry.
I think it's Tony.
All right. Thanks, James. Let's see. Well, I suppose for me, I went and I read some criticisms, and you know, I understand the argument of appropriation and the issue of royalty. I thought what was interesting in some of the criticism, well, I didn't read, you know, obviously I haven't read everything, but what I have read in none of the criticisms that one in particular talked a lot about Achebe. And nobody pointed out what I think is a really important premise in the film, and one of the sort of the principles that interconnects all the different cultures in the diaspora. Now, you know, obviously it's a very spiritual film. One of the precepts in Black music making and in African philosophy and is contrariety, or the coexistence of contrary or contradictory entities. And one of, you know, I went and looked at my book, old book, Morning Yet on Creation Day by Chinua Achebe, and he talks about balance. Wole Soyinka, myth, literature, and the African world. He's talking about Ogun and the extent to which Ogun incorporates so many different contradictions is significant, that he says. Well, this is a precept that Beyonce foregrounds in the film. So what I did was go back and look at different things that she did, and I saw a lot of parallels with some of the really important intellectuals of yesteryear. So dark and light, duality, the unbalancing of good and evil, all of this is what you need to make a move. So I think, you know, a lot of contemporary theory and criticism focuses a lot on problematizing and the pinpointing and foregrounding of contradictions, which is all well and good. I think one of the things that she's doing here is positing an alternative. You know, when I'm in class, sometimes I ask students, what is Black? What's Black beyond, you know, phenotype? What does that mean? And people oftentimes are flustered. And when they do answer the question, it oftentimes has to do with something that's television. So the fact that she's foregrounding this really significant precept, I think, is significant. The king, for me, I thought was rather metaphorical. there's a point where she's, one character says, well, the whole thing is, who are you? And one character, be your own king. Reminded me of Ralph Ellison, strangely enough. There's a scene in Ralph Ellison, and for people who may not read Ellison anymore, let's see. So Saidiya Hartman recently characterized Ralph Ellison, quote, as a philosopher of Black expressive form and an astute cultural analysis. Now, I'm not saying that I have no idea how she would feel about the film, but be your own king seems to parallel Ellison's point. The character tells the invisible man, be your own father, young man. And remember, the world is possible if only you'll discover it. So, Beyonce doesn't present herself as a quote unquote intellectual. And yet there are intellectuals who are, criticizing her. That's a really important point and this whole thing about contrariety manifests itself in a number of ways. It resolves the mind-body split, which is central to spirituality and all of the different musical forms that Stephanie highlighted at the outset. Let's see. Also thought it was notable with the red, black, and green American flag or black flag. Some of this reminded me of Haile Gerima's Sankofa. There's also a critique of colorism, which is another variant of colonialist values. And the adornment, for me, reminded me of Zora Neale Hurston's characteristic of Negro expression when she says, put us any damn where, we gonna make it look cute. So what I did was sort of look at various points in the film and explore different sort of correlations with intellectual figures who've been, influential, to many of us. Right? So that's my 2 cents.
Oh, thanks everyone. I'm just sitting here kind of enraptured by all of my colleagues here and what they're saying. I'm going to kind of take this in a different direction of taking some of the aesthetics of hip hop, particularly sampling, which I think, is part of my work and research as an artist scholar, of thinking about the sampling aesthetic that is really core to Black improvisational aesthetic making in hip hop, really coming out of jazz, and how that kind of takes up a particular aesthetic tool here that is used by Beyonce and her team and to construct this film. And so I'm thinking of sampling, thinking about the Blackness of the transatlantic and the simultaneity of Blackness that is being sampled and remixed by Beyonce visually, sonically, and gesturally in this work to create this composite of her representation of how she is restructuring, reconstructing, and deconstructing this notion of the Lion King, which is given to us by a white writer. It's not given to us, by us, for us, about us, to evoke Du Bois's idea of Black theatricality and Black performance. And so when we think about Blackness as being sampled and remixed, when we hear her say, they'll never take my power, my power, my power. They'll never take my power, my power, my power. The incantation here is really important for us to think about that repetition and revision of power generally, and the hierarchical relationship between Blackness and the notion of king generally. And I think when we think about king in that moment, there's a refrain that says, they feel away, oh wow, boma boma yay. This is a phrase, it's Kinshasa, that was used and also connected to boma yay. If you think about that in relationship to Lingala, which we understand in some translations to mean kill him. So the idea of the king as slayable, and the idea of hierarchical relationships as slayable. For the beehive, we know the idea to slay as a verb and as a way of living and a way of knowing and being in the world is very important. So when she keeps asking us to think about, they'll never take my power, you know, who is the they that she's invoking for us to think about as we frame our relationship to this aesthetic, this visual album, as she calls it. What is she asking us to see and feel? Well, I think that's up to us based on what we bring to the work and what our worldview is to be able to translate the multiple visual, sonic, and embodied gestures that are sampled and remixed outside of their context in this video, right? So when you see, you know, a Yoruba priest on the beach with a light-skinned Black woman dressed in white. So that has multiple diasporic cadences or translations, also very different continental resonances, depending on what nation you're talking about for that symbolic representation to be contextualized. So they'll never take my power, my power, my power. That sample is a through line throughout the text. And so I think when we think about Black is King, what does that mean in the game of the world? And I think she's setting the world out for us. That chess metaphor is very important in hip hop, of thinking about the game and the game of hip hop and who is playing and what roles are we playing. And so when we think of the Black is King as regal and royal, who are we within this larger game of the world? And why are we, as that opening refrain, I believe she says, we're more than what we seem. We're more than the world. You know, we're more than just these representations. And so by her centering Blackness on the continent, I think this is also a reclamation away from Disney, because Black and Disney don't go together. They don't have a relationship. The only way that Blackness and Disney go together is either with Princess Tiana and we're in a frog for half the movie, or we are in Africa, which Africa in the colonial sense belongs to the colonizer. And they take from us, from the continent, what they want. So for her to reconstruct what Africa is as a child descendant of forced migrants to this diaspora, to return back to claim, what is there to claim but fragments, but samples, besides what she can claim from the knowledge she has of her family genealogy, or through the US kind of perpetuation of 23andMe genealogical lines, whether that be through that kind of return to eugenesis, phenotypical notions of race, or through the, you know, Skip Gates reimagining of that through kind of reclamations of these, you know, I would say symbolic returns to Africa through the 23andMe type of test. And so when we consume the mythologies of Disney, accepting those versions of Africa as part of our orientation to the continent, when we think about what does that do to the African diasporic psyche when this isn't, a transnational corporation that is Disney, and it sells our culture back to us in ways that it chooses for us to consume it. So for me, I'm thinking about why, if we think about what is the king? So if we go back to the game that she's setting out for us, king is the most important chess piece, and every player's got one, right? And the opponent has to checkmate the king in order to win. The king can move in any direction, but the queen is the most powerful piece in the game. And so she is the queen bee. So she knows her power. They'll never take my power, my power, my power. She knows what power she has. So it's no problem for her to be able to ask us to think about king, not only as an embodied state of being, knowing, queen, embodied state of being, knowing, a status, but also an action, a verb. How do you king someone? How do you queen someone? How do you embody these type of moves strategically to think about who we are to ourselves? So the Lion King itself, then it's now a sentimental nostalgia, and Disney's practice is to remake its films over and over, to reintroduce it to a new generation of consumers, and to resituate the subjects of those films to a new generation as well. So for them to turn over a reconstruction possibility of the franchise to Beyonce is giving her a lot of power. But Beyonce is saying, I already have the power. They'll never take my power. And my power is to code this in a way that you'll never take the time to decode or understand. And I think she's counting on that. Little does she know that folks like us, that's all we want to do is decode it. So the power and audacity of her is, to me, the most exciting part of the film. The power and audacity of Black in color, and the multiplicity of Black in color, not just our bodies and our skin tones, our hair textures, the way that we self-adorn, our beauty, and a multiplicity of representations. Your skin is just like pearls, the best thing in the world. I don't take pearl to mean the color of the pearl. I take pearl to mean the value and of the jewel of Blackness itself, the value of that. So covering us in beauty as a strategy of resistance, and also showing that in excess, that we have our beauty and our aesthetic in abundance in a time of darkness, pain, and trauma internationally for Blacks throughout the continent and the diaspora. I think it is a powerful reclamation ritual that she's working to develop. And she can only use the tool she has. The idea that she has this deep knowledge of Africa, of every country in Africa, every ritual, every language, that she's going to be able to represent an entire continent that is made of multiple countries, languages, cultures, ideas, is a large expectation to put on a pop artist. So I would say we could give her a little break. But imagining us futuristically affluent and corpulent and whole, with the possibilities of us being anything we can imagine of ourselves, and beautiful excess, connecting us across languages and cultures, is a project of cultural translation, linguistic and aesthetic translation for all of us. We should ask ourselves, what don't we know, and why do we continue to consent to not know it? Why do we continue to let these representations of Africa flow back to us from giant corporations like Disney and celebrate Black is King coming out, when we should be demanding more from all of our entertainment institutions that continue to create representations of us that are just as fictional as what many of the critics are accusing Beyonce of creating in this fantastical representation that she's created in Black is King. And so I will, you know, kind of set a little bit of the backdrop of, you know, when this comes out, John Lewis is just passing. Michelle Obama is, you know, releasing her Becoming podcast, and, you know, is coming off of a huge book tour of being this representation of promise and hope that many people thought she would potentially run for office. And she blatantly lets us know in the book that she will not. And then Beyonce gives us, you know, Black is King in July, in the midst of all of this and the weather of anti-Blackness that Christina Sharp reminds us of, that is so powerful. And I think that this is Beyonce's wake work, if we will reference the work that Christina asks us to think about. The work of us doing the wake work is to understand that understanding anti-Blackness as something other than just an event or a moment in time, but as more of a continuous set of practices and experiences and capacities of violence against the Black subject that continue in perpetuity. And that when we insert ourselves differently within that narrative, that we are often surprised by our own ingenuity and our own acts of improvisation and our own possibility, because we've digested Disney's version of ourselves for so long. So in the tradition of Kara Walker and Octavia Butler and Fela Kuti and Betty Davis and others who dared to reimagine Blackness through a transatlantic prism of possibility, whether that be sonic, aesthetically, or embodied. I think this is pure potentiality of imagination. And I think we have to take it as art. And one of the questions I would like to ask is, what is the responsibility that we're holding artists to? And does it come from our dearth of representation politically that satiates our desire to be represented in a way that makes us feel legible and audible, not only as Black people, but in the beauty of our multiplicity, the beauty of our differences? That will we settle for this homogenized version of ourselves that Disney packages, which is a lion and Simba, or us represented, you know, as animals for large parts of the Disney franchise? Or will we dare to create these fantastical reimaginings that create these transnational maps of who we are in more complex and generous ways? Thank you.
Fantastic. Everyone, just superb comments and reflections on Beyonce and Black is King. And so what we're going to do now is just take a moment, and if there's any questions or that you have with each other, comments that you would like to have bounce off of each other, and at that time we'll also open it up for question and answers, and I'll begin to monitor those and bring those to us. But if you want to start amongst yourselves, and then I'll feed you some questions. So, but this was just fantastic. Thank you all.
If I could just start, Sean, and so two questions. One is probably a comment and a question. To go to Tony's point on the more conceptual issues in terms of the Ogonian archetypes and all of the ideas you're drawing from Achebe and of course Shonekan. I think in terms of the spirituality that is circulated in Black is King, the idea of contraries and ambivalences, which I try to speak to, might be more captured by the trickster deity issue. And I say this to, in a way, reiterate the very excellent point you make. And it's important, especially when you think about the theoretical connections between Africa and the African diaspora, especially from the works of Louis Gates, in terms of issue as some kind of signifying monkey in a Black literary tradition. So I just wanted to point out that, to say that indeed I do agree that there seems to be some play of ambivalences in the work, a lot of contradictions that seem to be productive in terms of how they generate meaning. But the various contestations about the material issues Black is King is implicated in remain for me, and I wonder what people think about that. My question is to Nicole, and when you invoke the metaphor of the chess game, which is a really nice and powerful one, I immediately think of the famous assumption that the queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard. And I like the way you read that in relation to Beyoncé in reasserting what is actually happening in terms of a feminist ethic here. But again, you think about the chessboard and immediately think that the king is actually the most powerful piece on the chessboard, especially when you think that the queen, in terms of her labors, exists for the king. So for me, that problematizes and complicates the womanist politics in Black is King. And I'm using womanist deliberately to run away from feminism, because like Ayesha was saying, Walker was theorizing womanism, and a Nigerian scholar was also doing the same thing, whose name eludes me now, around the same time, probably a year or two apart. And I think that womanist moment is a nice way to think about the links between what Black is King is doing at a womanist level and the way it is interpolated in an African context. So I would welcome your comment on those.
I think it can be a both and. I mean, I think that womanism has been built upon by many Black feminist scholars. You know, I draw on, Roxane Gay and Joan Morgan. I think that Beyonce lives in a flexible feminist gray area, and she's very clear about that. I mean, this is, textbook Joan Morgan, of feminism that F's with the grays. And she lives in a gray area that she's very clear about. I mean, her Jay is her king. She's very clear. She lays that out. She is unapologetically in a heteronormative relationship. But I think this translates, though, to the ways that those kind of heteronormativities are mined and replicated within same-sex loving marriages, within queer, relationships. And I think that she queers that as well. And so I think this idea that as long as you think you are, that's fine. And I think that's the politics that B has played for a long time. You can think you're the most important one. That's fine. Whatever it needs to move this along, this narrative. But it's very clearly that she's running it. She let you know she was running it, and she will continue to let you know she's running it. And I think that she empowers a lot of feminists as she has discovered what feminism means to her. She's been very transparent about her journey and to understanding what Black feminism could mean to her. And I think as she grows, she also takes her audience with her. But I don't believe it's a either or binary between is she womanist or is she reifying any particular type of heteronormative tropes. I think she's doing both. Absolutely. I think it's gray and messy. And I think she's secure with being messy.
So I have a question. I have many questions for everybody, but let me not be greedy. I'd love to hear Ayesha talk about the double consciousness of African Americans, given your mention of the cotillion, as well as the Black Madonna, which both of those things are kind of problematic. So that's a question for Ayesha. And then if I could also ask First of all, Tony, love the mention of Achebe, Shonekan, Ellison. I mean, I just love that you brought that lens to it, those multiple lenses. And as you mentioned, Achebe's Morning Yet on Creation Day, oh my gosh, it took me back because I haven't looked at that for years. And it reminded me of Shoyinka's We Must Set Forth at Dawn, which both of those are about, I mean, they're using the symbol of mourning, which reminds me also of what Beyonce does in the film. But Ayesha, if you could please answer that question.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I'm gonna draw a little bit on Nicole and agree with the ways in which I think Beyonce is doing both at all times. So in terms of the Madonna, I don't want to presume why you were reading it as problematic, but I think there's a way in which, again, to draw on Nicole, we can think about her remixing that image of Mary and her children to elevate herself as a Black woman and as a mother, as saintly, as empowered, as sacred. And I think it appears at least 2 times in the film, definitely once in the house. And so I was just, it just struck me that one, we've had images of Black Madonnas coming out of like Black Power, for example. But the fact of not just a kind of Black Madonna, but herself as such. And I think about like her pregnancy photos, for example. And I mean, that's a trend now with other people, but I think for her, that is a kind of celebration of Blackness and femaleness and herself as mother that I found interesting. Although I would be curious to hear, I'm assuming maybe in terms of Christianity and like the various representations of spirituality, as James was referencing in his comments. But in terms of the cotillion, I mean, that's definitely a class element to that. I think the primary objective, or as I interpret as a primary objective in that scene, is beauty and femininity, that they have gloves, that it's formal, that they're, we can, in some circles, that's a celebration, that's a coming into womanhood, etc. Although we could obviously read the exclusiveness, the class elitism of that. But I think the kind of moments and choreography between the young women, the way in which it's shot, and then it's paired with not only Naomi Campbell as an icon of beauty, of timeless beauty at that too, but Lupita Nyong'o, and then these other people that may not be celebrities. So like the combination of those, that these girls in a very formalized way, but these portraits of what looked like families to me, or groups of women that were less formal, I think that complicates the narrative of the cotillion, so that the space that's created with Kelly Rowland and her daughter, and some of them are formally dressed. I think her daughter is, but I believe Beyonce and Kelly almost have like undergarments on. So that's a kind of deconstruction or a juxtaposition of that more formalized construction of femininity. I think the combination of all of those images together in that song, in the ways that we can complicate it, we could also see what she's attempted to do, and I think her primary objective is celebration. But I don't know if you wanted to say more about that moment too, or the kind of Madonna image.
Yeah. So the Madonna one I paused on because I have some sister scholars that I talk with about many things, and recently we were talking about Black Catholicism. And interestingly, we all grew up with some aspect of that in our lives. And we had a conversation about how uncomfortable that feels now, and so to see it in the film it gave me a little dissonant feel. And then the cotillion, I think you've addressed what I was thinking. So nice.
I will say with the Madonna thing too, I think Beyonce is invested in her identity as Mrs. Carter also. And so in that way, how much she engages her sexuality. So like when she came out with Drunken Love, for example, like I think there has been a progression in the ways that we think about Madonna and these dichotomies of, ladyhood and kind of stereotypes of lasciviousness projected on a Black woman. I think she's also had an evolution in relation to how she's engaged her body in her performance and her music and how she's expressed her sexuality. So I think in this moment and in various moments in this film, also express her investment in her identity as mother, which really stood out to me, but also as wife too. And I think that can be brought into the conversation about the Black Madonna image as well.
Very good. I got a few questions coming in, so let's go ahead and do those. I think the first one is to anyone or to all. So kind of a hypothetical or futuristic look here. So 40 years from now, how do you think we'll be talking and teaching about Beyonce and her legacy?
I mean, 40 might be a while for me, but I don't know. I mean, I'm doing a Beyonce class in the fall, if all goes well. And I don't know. I mean, I think we could look at any representation, like how are we talking about Lena Horne, or how are we talking about, Ruby Dee, or people who took, really critical risk. Freddie Washington, took critical risk in order to create art, and Zora Neale Hurston, I mean, I hope that we're talking about her as someone who had the wherewithal to be vulnerable enough to figure out who she was to herself, vis-a-vis her music label, vis-a-vis all the other kind of constructions. She's been in the business for a very long time. She didn't have the luxury of, she chose not to have the luxury of going to college and graduate school. So she's kind of done that before our eyes. So we watch her discover feminist voices and then sample them into her work. And we watched her read different books, and then we see it show up in her work. So I hope we're seeing her mature as an artist and give her the grace that we demand as we grow as artists and scholars, and know that, I think she's doing wonderful things, and hopefully she will do other wonderful things. But I think if we don't allow ourselves to critique art, then why are we making it? I love to get critiques as an artist. I love it because it helps me grow and it helps me figure out things that I could have thought of differently. And some of it I just throw away. I'm not interested at all. So that's my take.
So for me, thanks, Nicole. Yes, so I'm like you. In 40 years, I probably won't be in the classroom anymore, but I'll be in some place with a little walking stick. But I think that for me, what's important about Beyonce, and I hope that we remember these moments, that I think that the tide that moved from the United States to Africa in terms of pop culture, it began to turn with certain artists, among them Beyonce. I might mention Drake, even though not really completely, but those two artists are the two that I know of who have reached back to Africa and been successful in collaborating with African artists. So I'm reminded of what James said at the top of his comments, which was, whose Black is king? And he invited us to think about the various manifestations of Blackness. And I think in pop culture and in popular music, we've typically thought about that in terms of African American. As an African, of course, I know my fella, I know my Wizkid, I know my Sunny Ade and all of that. But African Americans did not know any of that, for the most part. I'm speaking just generally. And I think it is this moment that has allowed us to see African Americans reach back in a comprehensive way to work with African artists and give them some visibility that is so deserved, because that album is very much about a celebration of African music. So I would like her to be thought of that way, but also selfishly as a mother of Black kids who were born in this country, as a Nigerian mother, I also think that artists like Beyonce have helped my children understand their own identities as well. I mean, I can do as much as we can do as much as we can as African parents to kind of ground them on both sides of the Atlantic, but the music and I love what you said, Nicole, about sampling. I think that's so interesting. The ways in which these artists have sampled the continent have been really wonderful for young Africans growing up here to understand who they are, but also to understand how they can frame themselves as 21st century Black people, which I don't think we have done well up to this point.
Great. We have a couple here. One I think that you've touched on in the comments already, in your comments, your general comments. So I'm going to tie that to another question by the same person. So they were wondering if you could touch on the relationship between the themes of freedom and Black femininity in the film. And then they also ask about thoughts on the continuum of visual albums by Beyonce that she's gifted us, the development of her artistry from Self-Titled to Lemonade to Black is King. So maybe combining those two questions together, because I think those themes actually obviously are in all of those works as well. So it is to anyone. So.
My quick response to that would be that watching her gain cultural fluency across a multiplicity of Blacknesses, I think she's most fluent in the areas that she's grown up in, and that, she's very good at Southern, Black culture, particularly focused on Louisiana and Texas and kind of moving across Southern spaces. She's very fluent in various idioms of African-American vernacular culture as it pertains to dance and different type of sonic representations of space. She understands trap, she understands, go-go. She's very good around US idioms of Blackness. I think here we see a more textbook representation of sampling that says, I'm learning this language, I'm going to take the shiny parts. And it's like when you learn a language, you want to show your best sentences and, your best idiomatic understandings. And I think that's what we get here in Black is King. We see a lack of fluency, but I see beautiful efforts to show yourself as wanting to understand something important to South African culture, something important to Nigerian culture, something important to, I think, parts of Africa are omitted. And so I think we have to not let Disney dictate what Africa is to us. You know, like it's a whole continent. It's north, south, east, and west. And I think that the US likes parts of Africa, and it doesn't like to recognize the holistic continent. And I think we have to say Africa is more than this. And, you know, I think I'm thinking of Blood and Water on Netflix, like all the amazing African productivity is coming out of Nigeria, South Africa, East Africa, North Africa right now. I mean, Nigeria has a full on like production, you know, hold on Netflix right now. Everything is coming out of Nigeria and South Africa. So I think there's just more that we could think about of Beyonce. Hopefully she'll become a player in having deeper fluency in the various kind of cultural valences of the continent.
I think my brief response to the question about the feminine and freedom is I see freedom maybe more represented in performance. Maybe in terms of topic and theme, but also the physical performance of Beyonce. I also maybe see freedom in her mobility throughout the film, so that she's in different spaces. And I noticed that she's in kind of like rural pastoral spaces as well as urban spaces. And I thought the juxtaposition of that was interesting. Or again, this moment where she's in the domestic space, although glamorized and extravagant and opulent, etc. But perhaps, at least in my understanding of Beyonce and her kind of control of her image, and you see her name in all aspects of the credits of this film. But I'm thinking about freedom maybe also exhibited in the personal. So I was almost, you know, when pictures of her come out, pictures of her children, right? Or kind of like when she's revealing intimate moments, or where she talks about her relationship, it just seems that those moments are very deliberate and choice. And so when that occurred in the film, I thought that was very interesting. And then to see the home video, which have their own aesthetics. And so I wonder if another aspect of freedom, as we think about her evolving as an artist, is more sharing of those intimacies in a form, although they're constructed in ways as well. But I think that the gesture towards the personal, or the suggestion that we're getting an invitation to some type of private domestic space, might be a kind of freedom for an artist. So that's another way to think about the ways in which she's representing femininity and how that may be related to representations of freedom.
Can I just quickly add very quickly that I think that as we consider her body of work in terms of the videos, that we not put them up against Solange's work, but that we put them in conversation with Solange's work. So I think that we can really make meaning of Black womanhood when we take Lemonade and Black is King and we put them with Solange's two wonderful videos, arguably maybe better, I don't know. And then, but again, let's not put them in competition, but then also add Nina Simone's work and all these other really wonderful women that have come through. So Beyonce is not, I mean, she's not the only one who has done some incredible things. Janet Jackson, you know, I mean, these are women who have put their mark on kind of a nuanced idea of what feminism looks like and can be.
Wonderful. So got a question here regarding capitalism and resistance. It's a two-part question. and it's how does the framework of the gift get complicated by how much Beyonce makes through royalties and sales? And on a related note, how much can she resist the Disney narrative if the film is being marketed, funded, screened by a Disney corporation? I think that's probably to you, Nicole, but I don't know. It didn't ask anyone to.
I don't want to take up too much space. I mean, I think we can do the math on that. I mean, Disney, they do what they want to do. And I mean, like you saw Princess and the Frog. I mean, it was a whack story to me, even though now it's become like, you know, one of the favorites of Disney. I think the politics behind it are really problematic of where you situate Black people when you decide to make a Disney princess film. And I think the thing with this is that, do people care enough about us and the variances of our culture to actually do the work to find out what we're saying in our work anyway? You know, I mean, oh, it's great, Beyonce. It's just Africa. Yep, all of that looks great. You need to paint a guy blue. Sounds good. You know, I mean, it's just, I mean, where's the due diligence to actually decode the work that we're doing anyway? And I think there's enough capital to be made out of putting a Beyonce center on a Disney platform. The capital's already revealed itself. I mean, honestly, it's not the Disney brand at all. I mean, when you think about some of the erotic dancing, the representation, which I find no problem with, but I mean, if my kid was 7, you know, my kid's 15, so it's very different. What, you know, so I think there's a lot of things that Disney didn't question, because we have to ask, do they care about us, or do they care about the capital that Beyonce brings to their brand?
Yeah, good. So I got 2 questions here that I'm going to mold together. They both talk about the responsibility of artists, and one mentions the comments that Beyonce has made about Nigeria in the last 24 hours, and the responsibility that we can put on celebrities' shoulders. And connecting that, they says, someone else asked about the accountability that we put on them and celebrities to these days versus politicians or other people of power. How would you analyze this comment in the climate of our upcoming elections? So we're kind of got 2 questions about where artists speak in a political realm, on an international stage and a domestic stage.
I think I could just have a go at that very briefly and say that when artists like Beyoncé put themselves out as people who consciously do political art, then we expect certain things from them. So for people who have clamored for some kind of commentary from Beyoncé, who hold them accountable, it's just this expectation or proof of burden that they themselves generated at first. So I would say, not in relation to the election, but more in regard to the first part of the question about accountability. Beyonce is the one who samples Ayesha. We should all be feminists and flawless. She's the one who goes in black and skin and makes explicitly political proclamations. So when people hold her accountable for her silences in some other context, I just think it goes back to that contrary Tony was talking about earlier. And if I could just tie this briefly to the question about where I would see in 40 years, I might still be a bit strong. I would say that the whole idea of the political economy of Beyonce's aesthetics would be part of the narratives, especially in terms of the questions earlier about appropriation. The fact, as I said, is that she cannot run away from those issues. And the production narrative is not just Disney focused. It's also in relation to the relationship between Beyoncé herself and the economic gains for the African collaborators she has. We're not thinking about that. So for people who argue about the Black capitalism at play here, you hear a lot of narratives about how there seems to be some kind of paternalistic relationship between Beyoncé and these collaborators. And why I don't endorse all of this, I think whatever views we surmise of Beyoncé herself owes much to the fact that she invites some of this.
But I also want to say that the questions are well made, you know, about her endorsement of the movement in Nigeria. But you know, we keep thinking about things like that, and we don't focus on what the Nigerian government has done, right? So let's refocus, which is what these young people want. It's not about Beyonce at this moment. It is about Buhari and other members of the cabinet and the military. So I mean, I just get a little irritated with looking for endorsement from Beyonce or from folks outside, or even from celebrities in Nigeria, without looking towards the people that we need to be hearing from. And we're not hearing, at least at this moment, I don't think, James, I don't know if you've heard anything, but I don't think they've said anything. And that's who we need to be hearing from.
I would echo that. And of course, the military armed by the US on many levels, but we don't want to know if we want to go down that road. So a specific question for Professor Bolden here, for Tony. And this is clearly a person who knows you. So what is the relationship that might be there between the work of Beyonce and Jimi Hendrix?
That's interesting. Let's see. Beyonce and Jimi Hendrix. Well, on some level, for both of them, the forms themselves are expressive or constitutive of a statement. Part of what I saw in the film, I remember listening to a lot of the older musicians, and one of the things that Angela Davis talks about with respect to blues, and she was talking about blues women, but it's also true, to the musicians generally, is that it was really in the music and not. We tend to think of things in terms of, lyrics, but sort of like Ayesha was talking about, the actual aesthetics themselves. So I guess you could see a connection there. She does say at the end of the film, she references the South as a kind of, a place that refuses to sort of water down, Blackness. But what I get from all of that, it connects with Hendrix, is again the principle of music making and what the music was really supposed to be about. We don't generally think of Jimi Hendrix, a lot of us didn't for many years, as quote unquote Black music, but he was really grounded in the blues. He just did it in a way that a lot of people didn't quite get until, a little bit later. But, he really developed, in Nashville, actually, on the chitlin circuit, chitlin circuit, right? So and the music was really about love. I mean, in terms of, you really break it down, until it becomes so commercialized. Part of I think the accomplishment that Hendrix achieves is to figure out a way to, resolve the contradiction, at least artistically, between, commerce and virtuosity and expressing the music on his own terms, in terms of what the music was really about. And I think, that's what I think, I get from a lot of of what Beyonce does, you know, in terms of redirecting the actual philosophy of the music, you know, and what the music was supposed to be about.
Very good. We've come to our time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I want to thank our panelists, Dr. Shonekan from the University of Missouri, Dr. Hardison, Dr. Yékú, Dr. Bolden, and Dr. Hodges Persley from the University of Kansas. And we're going to take a privilege here, go look at all of these wonderful scholars and their work. You can find their works on their website, but we're going to take a privilege here because it was a unique day for us. And it was publication day for a colleague of ours here. And so we're going to let everyone know that there is a new book out by Dr. Bolden. And we'll get it here in a second if I can get all the other things off my screen. And let everyone know Groove Theory. It came out from the University of Mississippi Press today. So it is hot off the press and looks at the foundations of funk in the blues. And you just heard part of him discussing the blues on cursory there. And it's a wonderful book. I encourage everyone to go out and get it and understand what Dr. Bolden is talking about. So please support this wonderful scholar as well as everyone else. But happy publication day, Tony. This is a good thing to celebrate on a day like today. And again, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And we will have another event actually next month. So be on the lookout for that, where we actually talk directly about Dr. Bolden's book, Groove Theory, a month from today on November 21st. So we look forward to that. And please keep everyone in their minds about ending police brutality, ending anti-Blackness, keep Nigeria in our minds right now. And thank everyone for joining us.